I stepped over the cracked sidewalk, my breath forming in soft, ghostly clouds in the evening air. The storm had passed just an hour ago, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and the distant rumble of thunder rolling away toward the horizon. The streetlights flickered, casting dim, yellow halos onto the asphalt, and puddles dotted the uneven pavement, shimmering under the weak glow. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just another night, another walk home from work, my bag slung over my shoulder, my thoughts heavy with exhaustion. The world felt quiet, almost too quiet, except for the occasional drip of water from the rooftops and the low hum of a street lamp buzzing near the corner. And then I saw it. At first, it was just another puddle, dark, still, reflecting the cloudy sky above. But when I stepped closer, something felt off. The reflection wasn't right. I looked up at the sky. The clouds were still thick, no stars, no moon. But in the puddle, it showed a clear night, an impossible one, filled with countless stars twinkling in a pitch-black sky. The contrast was so stark, so jarring, that I stumbled, my breath catching in my throat. I blinked hard. Maybe I was seeing things, my tired mind playing tricks on me. But when I leaned down for a closer look, a shiver ran through me. Because the stars in the puddle weren't just twinkling. They were moving, not like real stars, static and distant, but shifting, swirling, like something alive was watching me from beneath the surface. My gut clenched, and I reached into my pocket for my phone, half thinking to take a picture, but my fingers froze halfway. A shadow passed across the puddle, but not for me. I turned my head sharply, scanning the empty street. There was no one else around, no one near enough to cast a shadow. My heartbeat quickened as I looked back down, and the breath caught in my throat. The puddle no longer showed just the night sky. There was something else now, something standing there, just at the edges of the reflection. A shape, a figure, tall, watching, and it wasn't me. I staggered back, my foot splashing into another puddle, breaking the surface. The reflection rippled, distorting the image, but I swore that before it vanished, the figure had turned its head. Slowly, deliberately, toward me. I spun around, my eyes darting up and down the street. My ears strained for any sound beyond the quiet drip of rainwater, the distant howl of wind through alleyways. Nothing. The world remained unchanged. I swallowed hard, shaking off the creeping sense of unease, and forced myself to keep walking. My apartment was just 2 blocks away. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the stress of the week was getting to me. But as I passed another puddle, I didn't dare look down. Not after what I had seen. And certainly not after I heard the faintest sound. Something soft, something wet, like footsteps on damp pavement. Following me. I picked up my pace, my shoes slapping against the damp pavement. The sound of footsteps behind me was faint, barely audible over my own hurried steps. But it was there, just enough to send a pulse of cold fear through my veins. I told myself it was nothing, just the sound of water dripping from a ledge, or maybe the echo of my own movement. But I didn't believe it, because the steps didn't match mine. They were slightly off, just a second too late, too soft, like someone walking just behind me, deliberately matching my speed, but not quite getting it right. I clenched my jaw and forced myself not to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to check, to make sure I was alone. But something deep in my gut told me that if I so much as glanced over my shoulder, I'd see something I didn't want to see. I just needed to get home. 2 more blocks. That was it. The street lights above buzzed faintly, casting their dim, flickering glow onto the wet pavement. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the familiar side of my apartment building up ahead, but my gaze flicked downward just for a second, just for a quick look at the puddles dotting the sidewalk. And that's when I saw it again. The reflection wasn't right. This puddle, larger than the first, should have been mirroring the buildings and street lamps around me. But instead, it showed something else. A hallway. A long, dark corridor stretching endlessly, its walls cracked and wet, like an underground tunnel that had been abandoned for decades. Dim, flickering bulbs lined the ceiling, their sickly yellow glow casting elongated shadows along the slick, uneven floor. And then I saw the figure. It stood there, far at the end of the reflection, barely more than a silhouette. But even from that distance, I could tell it was facing me, watching. I stepped back, my breath hitching in my throat. The image rippled slightly, but didn't disappear. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. And then, in the reflection, it took a step forward. I jerked back so fast, I nearly slipped, my heel catching the curb. My heart was hammering now, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that my exhausted brain was playing tricks on me. But that explanation crumbled when I looked down again. The figure was closer. It had moved, and this time I could see more. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. There were details now, long, thin limbs, a body that seemed stretched, unnatural, as if it had been pulled and warped into something that barely resembled human. And its face, or rather, the absence of one, a blank expanse of smooth, pale skin where eyes, a nose, a mouth should have been. The longer I stared, the more I felt it, a pressure like something was pushing against my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. The street around me felt wrong, like the air was heavier, thicker, like the reflection was trying to pull me in. The static in my ears grew louder, a low, droning hum that vibrated in the back of my skull. My fingers twitched at my sides, and I forced myself to move, to break free from whatever trance had taken hold of me. I turned sharply and broke into a run. I didn't care if I looked insane. I didn't care if anyone saw me sprinting down the empty street like a lunatic. I just needed to get home. I bolted up the stairs to my apartment building, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fumbled with my keys. The metal felt ice cold in my shaking hands, and it took me 3 tries before I finally jammed the key into the lock and shoved the door open. I stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me. Silence. Nothing but the sound of my own frantic breathing. I pressed my forehead against the wood, eyes squeezed shut, my pulse pounding in my ears. It was fine. I was inside. I was safe. But then, drip. My breath caught. Drip. Slow. Steady. Rhythmic. I turned around, my stomach twisting. The puddle. A small one. Right there in the middle of my living room. Where the hell had it come from? I took a slow, unsteady step forward. The surface of the water was still, but the reflection inside it, it wasn't my ceiling. It was the hallway again. The same endless corridor from before. The same flickering bulbs casting their dim, sickly glow. But the figure? It was gone. And before I could react, a single, wet footprint appeared on my floor, right next to the puddle, and then another, and another, leading toward me. I didn't know what to do. The room around me seemed to be shifting, like the walls were closing in, pressing on me with a weight I couldn't shake. The puddle on the floor remained unchanged, still reflecting a hallway that should not have been there. Every step, every movement in the reflection felt wrong. The angles of the walls, the stretch of the hallway, it didn't match the layout of my apartment. It couldn't. I was standing in the very spot the reflection showed, but the hallway there, well, it wasn't part of this world. The reflection flickered again, just for a second, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw movement, shadowy figures shifting, their forms warped and indistinct, but clearly there. My heartbeat quickened. The quiet was suffocating. I could feel the pressure of it in my chest, as if the very air had grown thick, heavy with some unseen presence. A voice, almost imperceptible, seemed to whisper from the depths of the reflection. A soft murmur. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew the message it carried. It was not alone. Something was there, and it was coming closer. My feet were frozen to the floor, my legs refusing to move. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, a force more primal, a sense of inevitability, the knowledge that whatever I did, it wouldn't stop what was happening. Then, the first sound broke the silence. A soft but distinct sound, like a footstep. I didn't need to look to know where it came from. The puddle in front of me was alive, and whatever had been reflected, there was moving toward me. Another step, then another. Closer now. My breath hitched as I realized the footsteps in the reflection were not just moving toward me. They were now outside of the reflection, in my reality. I could hear them, each slow, deliberate step that echoed through my living room. I wasn't imagining it. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and my eyes darted to the floor, the puddle still there, the reflection still shifting. The hallway in the puddle no longer seemed static. It stretched further and further into darkness, the walls receding into an unending void. The shadowy figures from before, those distorted forms, were now standing right in front of me, but their faces were too blurred, too out of focus to make out. The footsteps continued. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, with a long, distorted shape. It had the same blurred outline as the reflection in the puddle, but now it was standing at the far end of my hallway, its presence undeniable. The creature, or whatever it was, stood still, its head slightly tilted as if it were studying me. And despite its lack of visible features, I felt its gaze. It was looking at me, watching me, waiting, my breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Was I dreaming? Was this real? But the feeling in my gut, the overwhelming sense of dread, told me this was no dream. This was happening. The footsteps grew louder, closer, more pronounced. But there was no one there. It wasn't just the reflection in the puddle anymore. Whatever was standing at the end of my hallway, the one-eyed thought I saw in the reflection, was now right in front of me. I didn't know how. I didn't know why. The figure tilted its head further, and a low, guttural sound emitted from it. Not a voice, but a vibration, a noise so deep I could feel it in my bones. It was as if the very air around it was alive, humming with energy. The footsteps in the reflection stopped. Everything went still. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were glued to the floor, and As much as I wanted to look away from that thing, I couldn't. It stepped forward. One step, then another. Each footfall reverberated through the apartment, and the sound grew louder with each movement, until it felt like the whole place was shaking under the pressure. And then, just as quickly as it started, the footsteps stopped. I didn't dare blink. The room was too quiet now, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears and make your skin crawl. But I could feel it. Something was watching me. I turned my head slowly. It was gone. The figure, the shadow, whatever it was, it had disappeared. The air around me felt empty, hollow. The stillness had settled in, a deep, suffocating silence that was more oppressive than the footsteps had been. I tried to steady my breathing, my thoughts racing, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart in my ears. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone. It was in my pocket, but I was scared to check. I didn't know what I'd find. I had to look. My hands were unsteady as I unlocked the screen and opened the camera app. The last photo I had taken was just a blank shot. It didn't make sense. But when I zoomed in, focusing on the faint light from the hallway, I saw it again. The figure standing in the reflection. But it wasn't just standing. It was moving, its blurry form advancing with unnatural speed. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw the figure begin to take steps toward the camera. I had no time to react, no time to think. Suddenly, the puddle on the floor began to ripple. Just a slight movement at first, but the ripples began to grow, spreading outward, distorting the reflection even further. It was as though the puddle itself was trying to pull something from the reflection into the real world. I could feel the air grow heavier again. And then, without warning, the figure lunged. But not at me. No, it lunged at the camera, its blurred face crashing into the screen. I let out a terrified scream, throwing my phone aside, but the impact was too much. The glass shattered, the phone slipping out of my hands and crashing to the floor. Everything went dark. The reflection was gone, and the only sound in the room was my own ragged breathing, echoing in the stillness. I didn't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at the shattered phone on the floor. The silence around me was suffocating, but it was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was charged with something dark, something waiting. My pulse thundered in my ears, each beat louder than the last. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of everything that had happened, the shadowy figure, the footsteps, the way it had moved so fast, so unnaturally fast, as if time itself bent when it crossed the threshold between the reflection and the real world. I shook my head, as if trying to clear the fog that clung to my thoughts. But no matter how hard I tried, the images, the feeling of that presence remained. The reflection was still fresh in my mind, so vivid, so real. It was as though it hadn't left me at all. I knew deep down that it hadn't. Something was still there. I turned my head toward the hallway, my eyes darting over every inch of it. The apartment felt cold now, colder than it ever had been before. The warm glow of the living room lights seemed to flicker, as if struggling to hold onto their strength. My body felt weak, but my mind refused to let go of the image of the figure. Where had it gone? What had it wanted? And more importantly, what was it? I took a step forward, my foot dragging across the floor as though my legs had become weighted with some invisible burden. The sound of my footsteps felt alien, too loud in the quiet, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to move. I had to find the reflection. But the puddle, The source of all this madness was gone. It had disappeared the moment the phone shattered. The cold tiles of the floor lay bare, as though mocking me for my desperation. I crouched down, placing my hands on the smooth, cold surface, but there was nothing. The water was gone. The space beneath me felt too dry, too real. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't vanished. The puddle was still there, somewhere, but it had shifted, moved. I could feel it pulling at me, like a string attached to my chest, tugging me toward the hallway. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to never look back. But something else, something deeper, drove me forward. My eyes were drawn to the hallway again, where the figure had been. It was too quiet now. The apartment, once so familiar, felt wrong. The walls seemed to close in, and the air thickened, making it harder to breathe. I knew I couldn't run away. Not now. With each step I took toward the hallway, the echo of my footsteps grew louder, more pronounced. It was as if the sound of my movements was being magnified, amplified by some unseen force. I couldn't tell if I was the one causing it or if it was being created around me. Either way, it felt wrong. And then I heard it. A faint clicking noise, soft at first, like the sound of fingernails tapping on wood. It was almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make me freeze in my tracks. The sound was coming from the dark end of the hallway, for where the figure had been. I turned my head, my eyes darting down the length of the corridor. Nothing. The hallway remained empty, bathed in the dim light from the living room, but I could feel it. That oppressive weight, like someone was standing there just out of sight, watching. The clicking sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just fingernails anymore. It was sharper, harsher, like the sound of teeth rubbing together, grinding. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt thick, too heavy, as though it was pressing on my chest. My fingers tingled with a coldness I couldn't explain. I turned my body slightly to the left, keeping my eyes locked on the end of the hallway, where the dark shadows seemed to gather. And then I saw it. A flicker. A shadow. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was real. It crossed the hallway quickly, too fast for me to get a good look. But the movement was unmistakable. I gasped, my breath coming in ragged bursts. My legs trembled beneath me, threatening to give way, but I held my ground. I had to know. Whatever this was, whatever was happening to me, I had to understand it. I couldn't let fear control me any longer. I stepped forward again, the sound of my feet dragging across the floor, making my teeth clench. The clicking noise was now louder, closer. I felt it reverberating through my bones, and it was enough to make me dizzy. The walls around me seemed to shimmer, the edges of my vision blurring, as if the world itself was shifting with every breath I took. I reached the edge of the hallway and peered into the darkness, my eyes searching desperately for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just shadows, silent shadows. And then I heard it again, a faint whisper, a voice. It was so soft, so quiet, that I couldn't make out the words. But the tone, it was familiar. I'd heard it before, somewhere deep in my subconscious. I couldn't place it, but I knew it was calling me. I stepped forward, my body moving on its own, drawn by the voice. I reached the end of the hallway and looked around. The space was empty, but the air was alive with tension. It felt thick, as though something was waiting for me. And then I saw it. The puddle. It was back. But this time, it wasn't on the floor. It was in front of me, stretching across the floor as if the room itself had been swallowed by it. I took a hesitant step forward, my feet sinking into the cold surface. The reflection, however, wasn't the same. It was different. The hallway in the reflection was no longer a simple, linear space. It had changed, twisted. The walls were warped, like they were made of some other material, bending and curling in ways that defied logic. And at the far end of the reflection, I saw it again. The figure. It was standing at the end of the hallway, just as before. But now, its features were clearer. It didn't have a face, not exactly. Its form was humanoid, but its edges were blurry, as if it existed in some other dimension. The figure's arms hung loosely at its sides, but its head was tilted in a way that made my stomach churn. The clicking noise returned, louder now, like it was coming from right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the dimly lit hallway, stretching off into the darkness. I turned back to the puddle, and I saw it. The figure was moving again, its blurred shape advancing toward me. It wasn't walking. It was gliding, its feet barely touching the ground as it approached. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure's eyes, if you could call them that, seemed to glow faintly, piercing through the blur of its face. The intensity of its gaze was overwhelming. It was as if it could see me, understand me, know me. And then, in a voice that was no longer a whisper, but a loud, chilling hiss, it spoke. "You cannot escape." The voice still echoed in my head. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the coldness of them, the knowing, the way they carried with them an inevitable sense of doom. It was as though the figure wasn't just speaking to me, but through me, pulling at the very core of my being. The reflection in the puddle shifted again. The figure continued to glide toward me, its body remaining formless, like some kind of shadowy wraith made of the darkest corners of my fears. Its eyes, no, its gaze locked onto mine, and that feeling, that deep, suffocating chill, crawled through my veins. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but the sound didn't leave my throat. The air around me thickened, pressing against my chest, forcing me to stay still. The walls around me closed in tighter, as if the very apartment was being consumed by the dark reflection of the puddle. Everything felt unreal, as though the laws of the world had stopped functioning properly, leaving only the horrors of the unknown to govern what was left of my sanity. The figure took another step forward. The sound of its movements, those eerie clicks, became a steady rhythm, beating against the silence. It was getting closer now, so close that I could feel the heat of its presence through the very air around me. And then I heard it again, the whisper, but this time louder, clearer. The words weren't just chilling, they were commanding. "You belong to me now." The puddle beneath me rippled, as if reacting to its words. The water churned violently, swirling in unnatural patterns. The reflection in the puddle flickered like a broken television screen, distorting and warping until the image became too grotesque to comprehend. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was pulling me in. No, it was pulling something out of me. The room around me became darker. The walls seemed to stretch and bend, their colors fading to something beyond blackness. I was being swallowed by it, drawn into the reflection itself. "No!" I screamed, finally finding my voice. My heart raced, my hands trembling as I reached for the floor, trying to ground myself. but the air was so thick, my fingers slipping on the smooth surface. The reflection in the puddle seemed to beckon me with its pull, growing stronger by the second. Then, just as I thought I couldn't resist it any longer, I noticed something in the depths of the reflection. There was another figure. This one wasn't blurred, wasn't distorted. It was clear, alive, staring directly back at me from the puddle. It was me, but not exactly. This reflection of myself had an unsettling, hollow look. The eyes were dark, sunken, and the expression on the face. It wasn't mine. It was twisted as though it were mocking me. My reflection began to move, slowly, in sync with my own movements. And just like that, in the reflection, I saw myself smile, a smile that wasn't mine, a grin that stretched too wide, too unsettling. It was smiling because it knew I couldn't escape. And then, everything happened in a flash. The figure that had been advancing toward me, its clicks growing louder, reached the puddle. It leaned forward, its face merging with the surface of the water. The reflection of my twisted self, my distorted, smiling reflection, followed. I could feel the air grow thick again, the space between the puddle and my body narrowing until there was no distance left at all. Then it pulled me in. It was as if I had become a part of the puddle itself. The coldness, the darkness, the weight of the shadow consumed me. My breath stopped, and for a brief moment, I thought I had died. My body was pulled, stretched, distorted, and my skin felt as though it were dissolving. I fell into the reflection, but then it stopped. The world around me shifted again, and suddenly I was back in my apartment, back on the floor, staring at the puddle in front of me. The room had returned to normal, almost. The figure was gone, but the reflection, it was still there. And this time, it wasn't just a trick of the water. It was me, standing there, staring back at myself with that grotesque, knowing smile. And then, from the depths of the reflection, I heard a voice I recognized. My own. You'll never leave. And in that moment, I knew. It was over. The figure had taken me. I had become part of the reflection, lost forever in the puddle. And it would always wait for someone else, someone new, to step into the same trap. Because it knew. It always knew. The cycle would never end.